Hello everyone, and welcome to Makerspace online workshops. So today we're going to talk about the Ultimaker Cura software. This is the software if you're going to use our Ultimaker S5 3D printer. You're going to need to bring your STL, your 3D model, into this program to configure it and slice it for the printer. So let's start up here at the top left. You see Ultimaker S5. When you open up your program, you're probably not going to have this. Just click on this, go Add Printer, and you're going to see the S5 right there. But you want to make sure you select Add a non-networked printer, as you're not actually connected to the S5. So click Ultimaker S5, click Add. I'm going to hit Cancel because I've already added it, and then you should see it up there. Next thing we're going to do is open up our 3D file. So it should be an STL file that you've exported from another 3D program. I'm going to click on this. I'm going to click on my file, and there it is. And this is a DNA strand that a instructor printed a while back. Now, if you click your right mouse button, hold it down, and then move your mouse, you can rotate around this if you want to rotate around it. Okay. Now let's go up to the materials panel. So the Ultimaker has two different heads on it, which means you can run two different filaments at the same time. This does mean you could actually run two different colors, but envision this: every layer has to be done in both colors. So what it does is it prints one color, goes to the side of the machine, clicks on a button, and it shifts the head to the other head, and then it completes the rest of that layer in a different color. You do have to have a two object model to actually do this. It is fairly complicated, but there is a help menu on Cura right up the top here. Right at the end of the menu items, you can see it, the help, and you can look into it there. But what we mostly use the second head for is called PVA. So PVA is an alcohol-based filament that actually dissolves in water in about 3 to 4 hours. So we use that for supports. This model here is going to need tons of supports, because there's tons of areas that are actually in the air or overlapping. So it's fantastic for that, because usually with supports you're going to print them in the same material, usually a PLA or an ABS. At the end you're going to get all these supports. They do break off fairly easily, but they usually leave little nibs or knobs on your object, and then you're going to have to deal with that by sanding it or filing it down somehow. Sometimes it's not even practical because the supports may be inside an area that you can't even get to. So the PVA is just fantastic. So let's start with the filaments. So we go up here, we see generic PLA. Just click on the first tab, and then this menu is going to come up. So we want to select what our main object is going to be printed out with this. So right now we've got a tough PLA loaded. So just click on the material. It is an Ultimaker material, and you can get this from the tech, and we can go over this when you're ready to print and see what materials we do have loaded up. But we'll go to Ultimaker. It's called Tough PLA I have loaded, and it's black Tough PLA. And you see this stuff, you don't want to change anything here, just say keep. And the print core is the first head, which is AA, and it is 0.4. That's the diameter of the head. You want to make sure this is 0.04. Also, make sure this is checked enable. Okay? Let's go to the second head now. So click on the material again. We've got it enabled. We're going to go to Ultimaker. We're going to go down to the PVA and say natural PVA. Keep those settings. And this time we're on the other head, which is the BB head, and make sure again it's 0.04. If you click on that, you can see you can choose different actual heads for this. So we want the BB04, and again, just say, once you click that, just say keep the settings. Okay. Now over here, are the actual print settings. So I'm just going to click on that, and this interface pops up, and you can click on either of these, but right here under Profile, if you click on that, you're going to see extra fine, fine, normal, and fast. There is a few other modes like draft. You can go super fast if you just want to kind of get an idea of the shape. But basically, I would stick to these default headings. There's extra fine, fine, normal, and fast. Now, what this means is the finer it is, the thinner the actual layer that it prints. So the resolution is way higher the finer you go. Now I have to tell you, the finer you go, the longer it's going to take to print. And the Ultimaker, if you are used to our Ditto, our Tinkering Ditto Pro printers, the Ultimaker, even when you don't use supports, can take up to 3 or 4 times longer to print a 3D object than the Ditto. The resolution is usually a bit higher, but still it takes a lot longer to print on the Ultimaker. The results are very professional though. So I would just use one of these default settings, click on Fine, and just say Keep. Now we'll go through all of this, these menu items here. So these are the default settings, so to be honest, I wouldn't advise changing any of these. If you click Quality, that's the actual layer height, and that's under the Fine setting. So you don't want to change that. The shell, that's the thickness of the actual shell or the perimeter of your object. You don't want to check that. You don't really want to change that. The infill, this is fairly interesting. I would leave this, but if you look here, you can actually change the infill, which is usually a grid pattern. So inside of your object, it needs infill. It's going to fill up with something. Usually it's more like a grid, usually based on squares. It defaults to triangles on this. There's a number of different infills you can use, like zigzag. If you're interested in exploring the infill because you've got an object that requires something special, I would again go up to the top here and click on Help and look more into that. Otherwise, I would just leave that alone, use what they default. Wouldn't touch the material, as this is the temperature and the build plate temperature. Those are all default settings. They know what they're doing. I wouldn't change those at all. Speed, again, I would not change. This is the default. They know what they're doing. Again, travel of the head, do not change that. Cooling, do not change that either. Supports. Now this is where we do need to look at this. So a lot of times it's going to come unchecked on here. Now, this object, because it's got lots of overhangs and areas in the air, you need supports on here. So I'm going to click Support. And sometimes it's going to default to the number 1 extruder. Depending, if you were doing 2 PLAs or ABS materials, just 2 different colors, you would need one of these to be the support. However, we're using PVA, which is in an extruder 2, and that's the reason we're using PVA is for the support. Support placement, I like to say everywhere. You could just say touching the build plate, but I don't like relying on the algorithms. I want it to support all the structure, so I would always say everywhere. Support overhang, angle, I would not change that, but again, if you're really interested, go up to the Help menu here. So we've got our support, it's on, it's extruder 2, that's great. I'm just going to minimize that. Next thing that you may want to look at is the build plate adhesion. Now, I'm going to pull up the Help menu here, and this is really valuable. So you click on the Help and you can get to this, and it really illustrates it well what that means. This is basically a skirt, which is just the preliminary line that it does around the perimeter of an object. Does that on most printers. You've got your brim here, and then you've got your raft. Now, if an object is a cube, quite often I wouldn't even put a skirt or brim on because it's got a pretty flat base. If it's a longer rectangle kind of object, I would start thinking about putting a brim or a raft on. If your object is a sphere, I would definitely put probably a raft on. Now let me explain what the differences are. A cube has a nice flat bottom and its width is the same as its depth. It's probably going to adhere really well. If it's a longer rectangle kind of object, there's a good chance that the ends of it can start to curl up as it's printing, and this does happen a lot on longer objects. So if you put a brim or a raft on, it's going to adhere, it's going to make it stick down just a lot better, and it's probably not going to peel up. The difference between a brim and a raft really is just the thickness of it. So definitely consider that. Definitely you can read more about this here. The other thing was a sphere or an object that has a very small contact point down at the bottom. I would always put a brim or a raft on because it's got a very low contact point at the very base, so you want something that's going to give it a more stronger base. So anyhow, again, that's under the help menu. Let's come back to Cura. So brim, you can click on this. You can do the raft or the brim or a skirt or none. So again, on a smaller rectangle, I'd probably go none. I'd think about a brim and a raft. Again, if it's a longer, bigger object or a sphere or something with a low contact point. So let's just put on brim for now. Then you also have a choice. Now all my supports are in the PVA with Extruder 2, so I think I'm just going to stick to that. You could use Extruder 1 for the brim. You will have to break it off, and there could be some remains on your print if it's not using PLA. Okay, so dual extrusion, I wouldn't touch that. It's basically used to build a side tower to basically clean off the head when you're using dual materials. I wouldn't advise touching this. So to recap, I would choose up here basically the resolution, use one of the default settings, just say keep when it asks you that. Wouldn't touch anything here except for supports and build plate adhesion. Okay? Again, if you want to know more, just go up to this help menu here. So I'm just going to close that menu. It's all set, ready to go now. Now, we can just go slice, and it's going to start creating the G-code it needs for the printer. But there is this side menu on the left here. We're going to have to first click on the object, and then we've got a bunch of things we can do to it. So this is move. So now I can actually move the object around up and down. You don't really want to move it up and down because it's not going to replace, it's not going to place itself on the base. So if I hit 0 here, it should go back. That's good. But you may want to move it around a little bit. Your choice. Now the next item here is scale. So if it didn't come out in the right scale for me, you can just type in here what your new scale should be. It's on uniform scaling right now, which means everything's scaled. If you want to get a little crazy, you could do, you know, a scale that's going to distort your object. Now you see we've gone out of the print area, so we definitely don't want to do that. It's not going to print, and you can see it's all zebra stripe because we've gone out of the area. So to go back, we're going to go 100 uniform. Oh, except I distorted it, so now we're going to have to individually enter this. There we go. Back to the original. The next item down is rotate. So we can click these automatic things, or we can actually click on these loops here and rotate it manually. The times when I would use rotate would be because maybe there's an item, maybe there's some text or something that I know is not going to print very well at a certain angle, so I want that tipped up to the top, maybe on the front, or there's just maybe there's an important detail on the very bottom of the 3D objects never print well as far as details and that go, so you may want to rotate it there and flip it around. You can use this to change it just with that, so you can play with this a bit. You can then just hit reset and it's going to go back to where it started. That's a nice handy feature. The next one down is mirror. Now this is kind of a strange thing, if you ask me. It's actually going to change, it's going to flip the object. So if you have text or something, don't really understand why this would be useful, but I guess if you built the object backwards, you could actually flip it so the text did read correct. So that's what that is, mirroring. And you can mirror it, just by clicking on these arrows, you can mirror it different ways. Not sure why you would use that, but anyhow, it's there. Now, this is per model settings, and the only reason you would use this is if you have multiple models here. And it's kind of to do with this up here. But what you can do with this is change models individually. So this up here is global. In other words, if you got two models there, everything's going to work using this panel that you've set up here, okay? But with this, you can actually select one of the models and change the actual settings. So I could actually I could have built my own model and print it as a support. If you click on it, you see it's actually gone into a kind of a grid pattern, and that means it's now a support. This is the normal mode. Modify settings for overlaps and don't support overlaps. Again, these are some of these settings up here. I would go into the help, and they've got a good menu here, help stuff on what these actually do. So I would look at that if you're interested in that. It does get pretty complicated when you're doing multiple models at different settings. And down here, we're not going to really get into this either. It's called a support blocker. You can actually mask out areas if you are using supports on this, but you don't want them in a certain area. You can actually use this to block them out. Again, go up to the help menu if you're interested in finding out more about that. So I haven't changed much here. I'm going to now go, believe the model is ready to go. I'm going to go slice, and this will make the slicing that the 3D printer wants. It's actually called a G code that the printer will read. Okay, so it's finished slicing it, and you can see down here on the bottom right, we've got 5 days, 10 hours, and 53 minutes. I told you it takes a long time. It's going to take 614 grams of the filament. So we can now click on this, save file, and then it's going to ask you to save it to one of your file folders. You want to save it to a USB now, and then you're going to be plugging the USB into the Ultimaker. But if we want to look at this, the other button down here is preview. So I'm just going to click on that. And it's going to take a little while. Okay, so you can see it's got the outline of the basic shape there, and you can see all the support. So this is pretty extensive as far as the supports go. Again, right click, we can fly around it. This is pretty slow just because of the amount of math involved in generating this. If you do want to take a look at it, you can drag this slider down. Again, it's a little slow, but you can see all the supports there. That's pretty major to build this. But the cool thing is this will come out perfect because all the PVA will disintegrate. So again, I'd go save to file. I'm going to go find, I don't have a USB plugged in, but find your USB, save it to that. It's called a UFP file, and then you're going to take that USB stick to our Ultimaker printer and just plug it in. It's going to start up. You're going to select the file, hit print, and it's going to start for you. Okay, well that's about it. I hope that was helpful. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, you can email me at dgillard@langara.ca, and there should be lots of links to my email on the website. Thanks. We'll see you next time.